And let's finish the 6th chapter of Mary Poppins Comes Back, Robertson A's story. Mary Poppins has just told the story of the king of the castle and the dirty rascal, and now we return to Jane, Michael, and Mary Poppins together in the park. Mary Poppins ceased speaking. For a moment her hands lay still in her lap, and her eyes gazed out unseeingly across the lake. Then she sighed and gave her shoulders a little shake and stood up. "Now then," she said briskly, "best feet forward and off home." She turned to find Jane's eyes fixed steadily upon her. "You'll know me next time, I hope," she remarked tartly. "And you, Michael, get down off that seat at once. Do you want to break your neck and give me the trouble of calling a policeman?" She strapped the twins into the perambulator and pushed it in front of her with a quick, impatient movement. Jane and Michael fell into step behind. "I wonder where the king of the castle went when the rainbow disappeared," said Michael thoughtfully. "He went with it, I suppose, wherever it goes," said Jane. "But what I wonder is, what happened to the rascal?" Mary Poppins had wheeled the perambulator into the elm walk, and as the children turned the corner, Michael caught Jane's hand. "There he is!" he cried excitedly, pointing down the elm walk to the park gates. A tall, slim figure, curiously dressed in red and yellow, was swaggering toward the entrance. He stood for a moment, looking up and down Cherry Tree Lane and whistling. Then he slouched across to the opposite pavement and swung himself lazily over one of the garden fences. "It's ours!" said Jane, recognizing it by the brick that had always been missing. "He's gone into our garden. Run, Michael! Let's catch up with him." They ran at a gallop after Mary Poppins in the perambulator. Now then, no horseplay, please," said Mary Poppins, grabbing Michael's arm firmly as he rushed by. "But we want—" he began, squirming. "What did I say?" she demanded, glaring at him so fiercely that he dared not disobey. "Walk beside me, please, like a Christian. And, Jane, you can help me push the pram." Unwillingly, Jane fell into step beside her. As a rule, Mary Poppins allowed nobody to push the perambulator except herself, but today it seemed to Jane that she was purposely preventing them from running ahead. For here was Mary Poppins, who usually walked so quickly that it was difficult to keep up with her, going at a snail's pace down the elm walk, pausing every few minutes to gaze about her, and standing for at least a minute in front of a basket of litter. At last, after what seemed to them like hours, they came to the park gates. She kept them beside her until they reached the gate of number 17, then they broke from her and went flying through the garden. They darted behind the lilac tree. Not there. They searched among the rhododendrons and looked in the glass house, the tool shed, and the water butt. They even peered into a circle of hose piping. The dirty rascal was nowhere to be seen. There was only one other person in the garden, and that was Robertson A. He was sound asleep in the middle of the lawn with his cheek against the knives of the lawn-mower. "We've missed him," said Michael. "He must have taken a short-cut and gone out by the back way. Now we'll never see him again." He turned back to the lawn-mower. Jane was standing beside it, looking down affectionately at Robertson A. His old felt hat was pulled over his face, its crown crushed and dented into a curving peak. "I wonder if he had a good half-day," said Michael, whispering, so as not to disturb him. But small as the whisper was, Robertson A must have heard it, for he suddenly stirred in his sleep and settled himself more comfortably against the lawn-mower, and as he moved there was a faint jingling sound, as though, near at hand, small bells were softly ringing. With a start, Jane lifted her head and glanced at Michael. "Did you hear?" she whispered. He nodded, staring. Robertson A moved again and muttered in his sleep. They bent to listen. "Black and white cow," he murmured indistinctly. "Sat up in a tree, mumble, 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 it couldn't be me." Across his sleeping body, Jane and Michael gazed at each other with wondering eyes. "Humph! Well, to be him, I must say." Mary Poppins had come up behind them, and she too was staring down at Robertson A. "The lazy, idle, good-for-nothing," she said crossly, but she couldn't really have been as cross as she sounded, for she took her handkerchief out of her pocket and slipped it between Robertson A.'s cheek and the lawn-mower. "He'll have a clean face anyway when he wakes up. That'll surprise him," she said tartly, but Jane and Michael noticed how carefully she had been not to wake Robertson A., and how soft her eyes were when she turned away. They tiptoed after her, nodding wisely to one another. Each knew that the other understood. Mary Poppins trundled the perambulator up the steps and into the hall. The front door was shut with a quiet little click, Outside in the garden, Robertson A. slept on. That night, when Jane and Michael went to say good-night to him, Mr. Banks was in a towering rage. He was dressing to go out to dinner, but he couldn't find his best stud. "Well, by all that's lively, here it is," he cried suddenly. "In a tin of stove-blacking of all things on my dressing-table. That Robertson A's doing. I'll sack that fellow one of these days. He's nothing but a dirty rascal." And he could not have understood why Jane and Michael, when he said that, burst into such peals of joyous laughter. And that's the end of chapter 6.